Have you ever held a secret so massive that it felt like carrying a ticking time bomb in your chest? Standing at my sister Veronica's wedding reception, watching her toast to new beginnings with champagne that cost more than most people's car payments, I was sitting on a secret worth $25.5 million. And every fake smile, every hollow laugh, every moment I kept my mouth shut would turn out to be the smartest decision of my entire life. Before I tell you what happened when our supposedly dead parents walked through that door 5 days later, I need you to know that your support means everything to me. If this story touches your heart or makes you think about your own family, please take a moment to like or leave a comment. Thank you. I'm Hazel Vance, 30 years old. And until 3 weeks before my sister's wedding, I thought I was living a pretty ordinary life. I worked as a pediatric nurse in Chicago, drove a sensible Toyota Corolla that had seen better days, and lived in a one-bedroom apartment where the radiator clanged like a ghost with anger management issues. My older sister Veronica, on the other hand, had always been the golden child. Or at least, that's what she told anyone who'd listen. Veronica was 33, engaged to Sterling Blackwood Four. Yes, that's really his name. And yes, he insisted on using the whole thing. She worked in luxury real estate, which basically meant she showed overpriced condos to people who had more money than sense. And she'd perfected this way of laughing that sounded like wind chimes having a nervous breakdown. Everything about Veronica was carefully curated, from her blonde highlights that cost more than my monthly rent to her designer handbags that had their own insurance policies. Our parents had supposedly died in a car accident in Italy 3 months ago. I say supposedly because, well, you'll understand soon enough. The funeral had been closed casket, which Veronica had found tacky, and probably means they cheaped out on the mortuary services. Even in grief, she couldn't help but make everything about money and appearances. She'd cried exactly twice. Once when she realized she'd have to buy a black dress for the funeral, and once when she found out the estate would take months to settle. The wedding was everything Veronica had ever dreamed of, and more. We're talking about a venue that looked like something out of a fairy tale. If fairy tales came with a six-figure price tag, the Blackwood family had paid for everything, which Veronica mentioned approximately every 10 minutes. Sterling's family has been so generous, she'd say, fingering her 3-carat engagement ring like she was afraid it might evaporate. They understand the importance of starting a marriage off right. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, a purple monstrosity that Veronica insisted was lavender and very flattering on me, which was code for, I want to make sure I look better than everyone else in the photos. The dress made me look like an eggplant that had gone to finishing school. But I smiled and bore it, because that's what you do for family, even when family treats you like a supporting character in their personal Broadway show. The reception was in full swing when Veronica clinked her fork against her champagne glass for the 100th time that evening. She loved making speeches almost as much as she loved being the center of attention. I just want to say, she began, her voice carrying that fake emotional quiver she'd practiced in front of the mirror. How blessed I am to be joining such a distinguished family. After the tragedy with our parents, it's comforting to know that Sterling and I will be building our future on a foundation of success and prosperity. I nearly choked on my rubber chicken dinner. Foundation of success and prosperity. Our parents had been middle-class teachers who drove a 15-year-old Subaru and considered a trip to Chili's a fancy night out. But Veronica had already begun rewriting history, painting herself as some kind of orphaned heiress, rather than the daughter of two people who'd saved aluminum foil and reused Ziploc bags. What Veronica didn't know, what nobody knew, was that 3 weeks earlier I'd received a call that changed everything. It had come on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work, and I'd almost ignored it because the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. But something made me pick up. Maybe intuition, maybe fate, maybe just the fact that I was hiding in the supply closet trying to avoid my supervisor who wanted me to work another double shift. Miss Hazel Vance. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, like someone who charged by the syllable. Yes, this is Arthur Kane from Kane and Associates. I'm calling regarding your parents' estate. My heart had done this weird skip-jump thing that probably had a medical term I should know as a nurse. I thought the estate was still being processed. My sister said it could take months. Miss Vance, I need to meet with you privately. Are you available this afternoon? It's rather urgent. and it concerns matters that are, let's say, exclusively pertinent to you. Exclusively pertinent to me. Those three words would end up being the understatement of the century. That afternoon, I'd sat in Arthur Kane's office, which looked exactly like you'd expect a lawyer's office to look if that lawyer specialized in secrets worth millions. Dark wood, everything leather-bound books that nobody had probably opened since the Clinton administration, and a desk that could double as a small aircraft carrier. Mr. Kane himself looked like a character from a British mystery novel. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and with the kind of posture that suggested he'd never slouched a day in his life. Miss Vance. He began pulling out a folder thick enough to use as a doorstop. What I'm about to tell you may come as quite a shock. Your parents left very specific instructions regarding their estate with particular emphasis on discretion. Discretion. I'd echoed, feeling like I was suddenly in one of those movies where the ordinary person discovers they're actually royalty or a spy or something equally ridiculous. Your parents' estate is worth significantly more than you might have been led to believe. He paused, and I swear he did it for dramatic effect. Lawyers must take a class in dramatic pauses. The total value is $25.5 million. I'd laughed. Actually laughed out loud, because what else do you do when someone tells you something that absurd? I'm sorry, but you must have the wrong family. My parents were teachers. They bought generic cereal and argued about whether to set the thermostat above 68 degrees in winter. Mr. Kane had smiled then, this small, knowing smile that made me feel like I was the last person to get the joke at a party. Your parents were indeed teachers, Miss Vance. They were also extraordinarily savvy investors who began putting money away before you were born. They lived well below their means by choice, not necessity. He'd pulled out document after document showing me investment accounts, property holdings, and patent royalties from some educational software my father had developed in the 80s that apparently every school district in America had been using for decades. My head was spinning like a carnival ride, except instead of nausea, I felt this weird combination of pride and confusion. But why didn't they tell us? Why live like that, when they had all this? Your parents believed in the value of struggle, of earning your way. They wanted you and your sister to develop character, not entitlement. He'd adjusted his glasses, peering at me over them like he was evaluating whether I had that character he was talking about. Which brings me to the conditions of your inheritance. Of course there were conditions. There are always conditions when this much money is involved. It's like the universe's way of saying, hey, this seems too good to be true. Because it probably is. The estate is to be divided between you and your sister, but not equally. The division is based on certain criteria that your parents established. You are to receive the bulk of the estate, the $25.5 million I mentioned. Your sister Veronica is to receive a different amount. How much does Veronica get? I'd asked, already feeling guilty about the disparity, even though I had nothing to do with it. That will be revealed at the appropriate time. However, there is one crucial condition. You must not reveal the existence of this inheritance to anyone, especially your sister, until after a specific date. What date? 1 week after your sister's wedding. I'd stared at him like he'd just told me I needed to keep quiet about knowing the world was going to end. Veronica's wedding is in 3 weeks. You want me to go through her entire wedding knowing I have $25.5 million and not say anything. Your parents were very specific about this timing. They had their reasons, which will become clear. I must emphasize, Miss Vance, that if you reveal this information prematurely, you forfeit everything. The entire estate would then go to charity. But that's insane. Why would they do that? Mr. Kane had gathered his papers then, that same knowing smile playing at his lips. Your parents were very intelligent people, Miss Vance. They understood human nature perhaps better than most. Trust their judgment. Keep your silence. And after your sister's wedding, everything will make sense. I'd left his office feeling like I was carrying the weight of Fort Knox in my purse, $25.5 million. It didn't even sound real. I'd sat in my car for 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel, trying to wrap my brain around it. My parents, who had darned socks and saved wrapping paper from Christmas to reuse the next year, had been secret millionaires. The next 3 weeks had been torture. Veronica had called me daily with wedding updates, each call more extravagant than the last. "We're adding a chocolate fountain," she'd announced. One day, Sterling's mother says it's très chic. Everything with Veronica was très something lately, like she'd forgotten she was from Chicago and not Paris. "That's great, Char," I'd said while looking at my laptop screen showing my new bank balance notification from the estate lawyer, a preliminary transfer of just the checking account which alone had more money than I'd make in 5 years of nursing. "You don't sound excited," Veronica had accused. "This is my wedding, Hazel. The least you could do is pretend to care." If only she knew how much I cared. If only she knew that I was biting my tongue so hard it might fall off just to protect this secret that could change both our lives. But something about Mr. Kane's warning kept echoing in my head. Our parents had reasons. They understood human nature. As the wedding approached, I started noticing things about Veronica I'd either ignored or excused. Before, like how she'd gone through our parents' house the day after the funeral, marking items with sticky notes labeled Veronica or Donate Never Hazel, or how she'd casually mentioned that, as the older sister, she'd probably inherit more because that's just how these things work. She'd even pulled me aside 2 days before the wedding with this concerned expression that was about as genuine as a thriller bill. "Hazel, I've been thinking when the estate settles you might not get much. Mom and Dad didn't have a lot. And as the older daughter, I'll probably need to handle most of the financial decisions. But don't worry, I'll make sure you get something nice. Maybe Mom's jewelry box or Dad's watch." The jewelry box she was referring to contained costume jewelry from the 70s. The watch was a Timex that hadn't worked since the Bush administration. The first one. The morning of Veronica's wedding dawned like something out of a movie. If that movie was about keeping your mouth shut while your sister marries into a family that makes the Kennedys look middle class. The Blackwood estate sprawled across 40 acres of manicured the Hamptons countryside, complete with a hedge maze that probably required its own zip code and a fountain that shot water so high local airports had to roo around it. I arrived early to help Veronica get ready, which really meant standing there while a team of professionals did everything, and she barked orders like a general preparing for war. "The humidity is going to ruin everything," she wailed despite the fact that her hair had been shellacked with enough product to survive a Category 5 hurricane. "Hazel, go check on the flowers. Make sure they use the Belgian roses, not the Dutch ones. I can tell the difference." She couldn't tell the difference. Veronica couldn't tell the difference between a rose and a dandelion if her life depended on it. But Sterling's mother could, and that's all that mattered to her. Now, while I was supposedly checking on flowers, I overheard Sterling and his groomsmen in the garden. They were passing around a flask of something that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and Sterling was holding court like a king among peasants. "Veronica's been so worried about the estate settlement," Sterling was saying, and my ears perked up like a German shepherd hearing a bag of treats opening. "She thinks her parents had some hidden assets. Keeps talking about how teachers' pensions must be worth something." One of his groomsmen laughed this harsh, ugly sound. "Dude, you're marrying a public school teacher's daughter. What hidden assets? A collection of apple-shaped paperweights. Hey, every little bit helps." Sterling had replied, "Besides, once we're married, what's hers is mine, and if there's anything there, we'll make sure we get it all." Her sister seems like a pushover. Veronica says she'll probably just sign whatever we put in front of her. I'd stood there behind a ridiculous topiary shaped like a swan holding Belgian roses that looked exactly like Dutch roses, feeling my blood pressure rise to levels that definitely weren't healthy. A pushover. I'd been working 12-hour shifts in a pediatric ward dealing with sick kids and anxious parents while Veronica played dress-up in empty condos. But sure, I was the pushover. The ceremony itself was beautiful in that way, that things are beautiful when you throw unlimited money at them. Veronica floated down the aisle in a dress that cost more than some people's cars, her smile so bright you needed sunglasses. Sterling waited at the altar looking like he'd won the lottery, which I guess in his mind he had. After all, he was marrying someone he thought he could control, who came with potentially inheritable assets and no backbone to speak of. During the vows, Veronica actually had the audacity to include a line about building our wealth together on the foundation our families provided. I watched our great-aunt Beatrice dab at her eyes with a handkerchief, probably thinking Veronica was honoring our parents' memory. If only she knew Veronica was already counting chickens that hadn't just not hatched yet, but were sitting in a golden nest she didn't even know existed. The reception was where things got really interesting. After the fifth toast, because apparently rich people can't celebrate anything without making speeches about it, Veronica pulled me aside for what she called a sister moment. Her eyes were slightly glassy from champagne, and her carefully applied makeup was starting to show cracks, like her real personality trying to escape from underneath. "Hazel," she said, gripping my arm with her manicured nails, "I need to talk to you about something important." "Okay," I said, wondering if she was about to reveal she knew about the money. My heart did this weird flutter thing that I really should get checked out. Sterling and I have been discussing our future, and we want to make sure everything is properly allocated. Properly allocated, I repeated, because what else do you say when your sister starts talking like a corporate merger? The estate. Hazel. Mom and Dad's estate. Sterling's lawyer says that sometimes when there's no clear will, things can get messy. We want to avoid that. But there is a will, I said carefully. The lawyer said, "Lawyers say a lot of things." Veronica interrupted, waving her hand dismissively, nearly knocking over a centerpiece that probably cost more than my couch. "The point is, Sterling and I think it would be best if we handle everything. You're so busy with your little nursing job, and dealing with financial matters can be so complicated. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Of course, Sterling's already set aside some money to help you get a nicer apartment, something more appropriate for when you visit us. My little nursing job. Something more appropriate." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell her that I had $25.5 million waiting for me, that her new husband's pocket change meant nothing, that our parents had seen right through her act. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Because our parents had been smarter than all of us, and I was beginning to understand why. "That's very generous of you, Veronica," I said, and the words tasted like battery acid in my mouth. "Well, that's what family does," she said, already looking past me to her next social conquest. "We take care of each other even when there's disparity in our situations." The rest of the reception was a blur of forced smiles and small talk with Sterling's family, who seemed to view me as some sort of charitable project Veronica had taken on. Sterling's mother actually patted my hand at one point and said, "Don't worry, dear. Not everyone can marry well. I'm sure you'll find someone suitable." Suitable, like? I was a clearance rack item hoping to get picked up by someone who didn't mind a bargain. I smiled and nodded and counted the hours until I could leave, until I could get through the next week, until the truth would finally come out. During Veronica's bouquet toss, she made sure to aim it directly at me, probably thinking she was doing me a favor, giving the poor single sister a moment in the spotlight. I let it sail right past me and watched it land in the chocolate fountain, splattering Belgian chocolate all over Sterling's mother's Chanel suit. Veronica laughed it off, but I saw the flash of embarrassment in her eyes. Her perfect wedding with one brown stain on its record. If only she knew how many more stains were coming. 5 days after the wedding, I was sitting in Veronica's new house, a monstrosity of marble and glass that Sterling's parents had given them as a wedding gift. Apparently, in the Blackwood family, a starter home meant 6 bedrooms and a wine cellar that could double as a bomb shelter. Veronica had invited me over for what she called a family planning session, which I knew meant she wanted to talk about our parents' estate again. "You know, I want to take a moment here to tell you something important. If you're enjoying this story, if you're feeling that tension in your chest waiting to hear what happens next, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. I know it sounds like just another YouTube request, but it's really not. Every single subscription, every thumbs up, it tells me that these stories matter. That sharing these incredible real-life dramas helps us all feel less alone in our own family chaos. Your support literally keeps me going, keeps me searching for and sharing these unbelievable but true stories. It takes just a second, but it means the world to me. Thank you." So there I was, sitting on Veronica's white leather couch that looked like it had never been touched by human hands, holding a cup of tea in china. So delicate I was afraid breathing on it might shatter it. Veronica was going on about Sterling's investment strategies and how they could maximize the potential of our parents' assets once they were released. I've had Sterling's lawyer draw up some papers, she was saying, pulling out a folder that looked suspiciously official. Just a simple agreement that I'll handle the estate distribution. It's really for your benefit, Hazel. This way you won't have to deal with all the complicated tax implications. And the doorbell rang. Veronica frowned. We're not expecting anyone. Sterling's at the club until 4:00. She got up to answer it. Those ridiculous heels she always wore clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to something massive. I heard the door open, heard Veronica's voice start with, "Yes, can I help?" And then silence. Complete, absolute silence. The kind of silence that happens when your brain can't process what your eyes are seeing. "Veronica, honey, aren't you going to invite us in?" That voice, that impossible. Definitely not dead voice. I stood up so fast the delicate china cup fell shattering into about 1,000,000 pieces on Veronica's pristine floor. But I didn't care because walking into the living room were our parents, our supposedly dead, supposedly cremated, supposedly scattered in Italy parents. Mom looked exactly the same, maybe a little tanned, wearing one of her sensible pantsuits that Veronica had always called aggressively middle class. Dad was right behind her. And this is the part that still makes me laugh. He was wearing a Hawaiian shirt. The man who'd worn the same 3 polos for 20 years was wearing a Hawaiian shirt with flamingos on it. Behind them stood Mr. Kane, the estate lawyer, looking like the cat who'd not just eaten the canary, but the whole pet shop. And next to him was a small woman with a briefcase, who could only be the notary he'd brought along for what I was beginning to realize was going to be the show of the century. Veronica's mouth was opening and closing like a fish that had just discovered it couldn't breathe air. But you're the funeral. We buried you." "No, sweetheart," Mom said, settling onto the couch like she'd just come back from the grocery store instead of the grave. "You buried 2 very nice empty caskets. Very expensive ones too, I might add. Mahogany. Sterling's family would approve. I can't. What is happening?" Veronica's voice had reached a pitch that probably had dogs 3 towns over howling in sympathy. Dad sat down next to Mom, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him in life. Or, well, his previous life, his non-dead life. "You know what I mean? What's happening, Veronica, is something we call a test. And you failed it spectacularly. A test." Veronica had gone from shocked to angry, her face turning the exact shade of red as the roses at her wedding. Belgian or Dutch, who could tell? You faked your own deaths as a test. "Sit down, Veronica," Mom said, and it was her teacher voice, the one that could make 30 hyperactive third graders freeze in their tracks. "You too, Hazel, though I suspect you've been handling this better than your sister." I sat my legs feeling like jelly. Even though I'd known about the money, I hadn't known about this. My parents were alive. They'd been alive this whole time, probably watching everything, judging everything, planning everything. Mr. Kane cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should explain the legal particulars. Perhaps you should explain why I shouldn't call the police." Veronica shrieked. "This is fraud. This is completely legal." The notary spoke for the first time, her voice dry as toast. "Your parents filed all the appropriate paperwork. They've been listed as temporarily deceased for estate planning purposes. A completely legitimate financial strategy when properly executed." Temporarily deceased, I finally found my voice. "That's a thing when you have $25.5 million, Dad said, looking directly at Veronica. "A lot of things become possible." Veronica went white. Not pale, not blanched, but white like someone had deleted all the color from her face. 25 million. "Oh yes," Mom said, stirring sugar into her tea with the calmness of someone discussing the weather. "We've been quite successful with our investments. Teaching was our passion, but finance was our hobby. A very, very lucrative hobby." The silence in Veronica's perfect living room was so thick you could have served it at her wedding instead of that overpriced foie. Veronica stood frozen, her hand still on the doorframe, like she was considering making a run for it. But where do you run when your dead parents show up to explain they've been testing you from beyond the grave? "Sit down, Veronica," Dad repeated. And this time she moved, stumbling to a chair like her legs were controlled by a puppeteer who'd had too much coffee. Mr. Kane opened his briefcase with the kind of precision that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment for months, which, as it turned out, he had. 3 months ago, he began, "Your parents came to me with an unusual request. They wanted to determine how their daughters would handle their inheritance without the, shall we say, complications of their presence." Complications? Veronica's voice was barely a whisper. "You mean seeing how we'd act when we thought they were gone?" I translated. "The pieces falling into place like the world's most messed up jigsaw puzzle." "Exactly," Mom said. And there was something in her eyes. Disappointment mixed with vindication. Like a teacher who'd caught a student cheating but had hoped to be proven wrong. "We wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one was watching." The notary pulled out a laptop and started setting up what looked like a portable recording station. "Everything needs to be documented," she explained, like this was just another Tuesday in her life. Maybe it was. Maybe fake dead parents revealing themselves was her specialty. "We've been watching," Veronica, Dad said, and his voice had lost all its warmth. "Every move, every word, every decision you've made since you thought we were gone." Veronica's face went through about 17 different expressions in 3 seconds. "You've been spying on me." "Not spying," Mom corrected. "Observing." "There's a difference. Spying implies we didn't have the right to watch how our daughter handled our supposed death and the promise of an inheritance." Mr. Kane pulled out a tablet and swiped through to what looked like a video file. "Would you like to see some of what we documented?" "No," Veronica said quickly. "Too quickly." "I think we should," Mom said, nodding to Mr. Kane. The video started playing, and there was Veronica in our parents' house the day after the funeral talking on the phone to Sterling. Her voice came through the speakers crystal clear. "I'm going through their things now. It's mostly junk, but there might be some bonds or something hidden. Old people always hide money. I'll check the mattresses next." The Veronica on the couch made a sound like a stepped-on cat. The video switched to another scene. Veronica at a lawyer's office, not Mr. Kane, saying, "I need to know how to contest a will if my sister gets anything significant. She's not mentally stable. You know all that work at the hospital, it's affected her. I'd be a much better executive of any estate." "I never said that," Veronica protested. But even as the words left her mouth, we could all see her remembering that yes, she had said exactly that. Another clip. Veronica and Sterling at dinner 2 weeks ago. Sterling was saying, "Once we get the money from your parents, we can flip it into real estate. Your sister won't know what to do with her share anyway. We'll offer to manage it for her. Take a hefty management fee." Veronica's response in the video. "She'll hand it over. Hazel has always been too trusting. I bet I can get her to sign it all over within a month of receiving it." I felt something inside me break a little. Not my heart. That had been preparing for disappointment since Mr. Kane had warned me to stay quiet. But maybe my faith in family and the idea that blood meant something more than opportunity. "There's more," Mr. Kane said, his finger hovering over the screen. "Stop," Veronica said. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. "Just stop." "We have 47 hours of footage," Dad said matter-of-factly, "including your wedding where you told no less than 12 people that you were about to come into money from your poor dead parents' estate." Mom pulled out a tissue, but not to cry. She was cleaning her glasses the way she always did when she was about to deliver a particularly harsh truth. "You want to know the really sad part, Veronica? We weren't even testing you originally. We were just going to surprise you both with the inheritance at the wedding, a gift. But then we heard how you talked about us at the funeral, how you were already counting money you thought we didn't have, and we decided to wait to watch to see if grief would bring out your humanity or your greed. It brought out the greed." The notary said helpfully, like anyone needed that clarified. Veronica's hands were shaking now. But Hazel knew. She knew about the money. "I found out 3 weeks ago," I admitted. "Mr. Kane told me but said I had to keep quiet until after your wedding. And she did." Mom said, pride evident in her voice. "Even when you tried to get her to sign over her rights. Even when you called her nursing job little, even when you and Sterling plotted to take everything from her that was the real test," Dad added. "Not whether you'd be greedy. We suspected that. but whether Hazel would keep the secret, whether she'd protect the family's interests even when being insulted and diminished. Veronica stood up suddenly, her legs apparently deciding they worked again. This is insane. You can't just fake your death and spy on your children. What kind of parents do that? The kind who worked their entire lives to build something meaningful. Mom said, standing too. And even though Veronica was in heels and Mom was in sensible flats, Mom seemed taller somehow, the kind who wanted to make sure their legacy went to someone who would honor it, not sell it off for marble countertops and Belgian roses. They were Dutch, Veronica screamed, and then seemed to realize that probably wasn't the point. Mr. Kane stood up, pulling out a thick manila envelope from his briefcase with the kind of flourish usually reserved for magicians pulling rabbits from hats. Except this rabbit was about to bite Veronica right in her designer-clad assets. Now, regarding the distribution of the estate, he began, his voice taking on that lawyer tone that meant expensive things were about to happen. Wait. Sterling burst through the door, his golf clothes still pristine, because God forbid the man actually sweat. Veronica texted me. What's this about your parents being alive? He stopped dead when he saw Mom and Dad sitting there like the world's calmest zombies. What the sit down, Sterling? Dad said, and there was something in his voice that made Sterling Blackwood of Foe actually shut up and sit. As I was saying, Mr. Kane continued, the estate distribution was originally set to be split between the two daughters based on certain conditions. These conditions have now been met. He pulled out a document and began reading. To Veronica, Marie Vance Blackwood, we leave the sum of 0. What Veronica and Sterling screamed in unison, their voices harmonizing in outrage like the world's worst duet. However, Mr. Kane continued, unmoved by their outburst. You did receive your inheritance already. What are you talking about? Veronica's voice had gone shrill enough to make the crystal chandelier vibrate. I haven't received anything. Mom smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you understand where I got my ability to keep secrets. Your wedding, dear. That was your inheritance. The wedding was paid for by Sterling's family, Veronica protested. No, the notary said, pulling up another document on her laptop. The wedding was paid for by an anonymous benefactor who transferred funds to the Blackwood account 2 months ago. Your parents paid for your wedding. All $500,000 of it. Sterling stood up so fast his chair tipped over. 50. You told me your grandmother's trust paid for it. I thought she did. Veronica turned to him, then to our parents. You paid for my wedding. But why? Because Dad said, we wanted to give you something beautiful. One perfect day. That was your inheritance, Veronica. Every Belgian rose, every crystal glass, every bite of overpriced salmon. That was us saying goodbye to the daughter we thought we raised and hello to the stranger you became. But that's not fair. Veronica was crying now. Real tears this time, not the practiced ones from her wedding speech. Hazel gets $25.5 million and I get a wedding. A wedding where you told everyone you were about to inherit money, Mom reminded her. Where you and your husband plotted to steal from your sister. Where you showed everyone exactly who you really are. Sterling was doing rapid calculations on his phone, his face getting redder with each number he typed. 500,000. That's it. You're worth $25.5 million and you gave us less than 600,000. You gave us... I couldn't help but interject. Already counting Veronica's inheritance as yours, Sterling. He ignored me, turning to Veronica. You said your parents had hidden assets. You said we'd be set. I thought they did. I thought. Veronica stopped, realizing what she was admitting. You thought wrong, Mom said simply, and now everyone knows it. Mr. Kane pulled out another document. There's one more thing, Veronica. At your wedding you signed several documents you thought were prenuptial amendments. Veronica went pale again. She'd been doing a lot of that lately. The papers Sterling's lawyer had me sign. Actually, those papers were from us. Dad said, you signed away any right to contest this will, any right to future claims on the estate, and agreed that the wedding payment would serve as your complete inheritance. You tricked me into signing no more than you tried to trick Hazel into signing over her rights, Mom countered. The difference is, our trick was legal. Sterling was now standing behind Veronica, but not in a supportive way. More in a calculating how much this marriage is now worth way. So she gets nothing. My wife gets nothing. Your wife got a $500,000 wedding, the notary said dryly. That's not nothing. That's more than most people see in a lifetime, but it's already spent. Sterling shouted. Yes, Mom said that does seem to be Veronica's specialty. Spending money that isn't hers. I watched Veronica crumble in real time, not dramatically, not with flair, but quietly, like a sandcastle being eroded by waves. Everything she'd built her new life on the promise of money, the security of wealth, the position in Sterling's family was washing away. And Hazel. She finally asked, her voice small. Hazel gets everything else. Hazel gets what Hazel earned, Dad said. She kept the secret. She endured your insults. She showed us that at least one of our daughters understood that money isn't about what you can take, but about what you choose to give. She knew. Veronica suddenly found her anger again. She knew this whole time and she didn't tell me. That's entrapment or something. It's called keeping a promise, I said quietly. Something you might want to learn about. Sterling was already heading for the door. I need to call my lawyer. Sterling, Veronica called after him, but he didn't turn around. I'd go after him if I were you, Mom suggested. From what we observed, his family values money above all else. Without it, you might find yourself less welcome in the Blackwood family than you expected. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office. Not new, as in, I'd bought some fancy space with my millions, but new as in the hospital had finally given me the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years. Funny how money doesn't change everything when you don't let it. I'd taken exactly one thing from my inheritance so far. I'd paid off my student loans. The rest was sitting in various accounts Mr. Kane had helped me set up, growing quietly while I figured out what to do with it. Turns out when you go from broke to millionaire overnight, the smartest thing to do is absolutely nothing for a while. Veronica and Sterling's marriage had lasted exactly 18 days after our parents' resurrection. That's not an exaggeration. I know because Veronica had called me crying on day 19, begging me to help her pay for a lawyer. Sterling had filed for annulment claiming fraud. His argument, Veronica had misrepresented her financial situation. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. Please, Hazel. She'd sobbed into the phone. I know I was horrible. I know I said terrible things, but I'm your sister. That has to count for something. And you know what? It did count for something. Which is why I'd paid for her lawyer, a good one too, who made sure she got to keep the wedding gifts. About $50,000 worth of crystal and kitchen appliances she'd never use because Veronica couldn't cook anything that didn't come with microwave instructions. Mom and Dad had retreated to Arizona of all places. They'd bought a modest condo near the beach where Dad wore his Hawaiian shirts unironically now, and Mom had taken up paddleboarding. They called once a week, and we talked about everything except money. We're proud of you, Mom had said during our last call. For keeping the secret, yes, but more for what you're doing now. What I was doing now was working with the hospital to set up a fund for families who couldn't afford their children's medical care. It wasn't a huge gesture, maybe $1 million to start, but it felt right, like something my parents, the real parents who'd raised me, not the millionaire investors they'd secretly been, would have approved of. Veronica had moved back to Chicago proper into a studio apartment that was roughly the size of her former walk-in closet. She'd gotten a job at a different real estate firm, one that dealt with regular homes for regular people. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been showing a young couple a 2-bedroom ranch that needed work but had good bones. It's not much, she told them, and then caught herself. I mean, it's not a mansion, but it's a start. Everyone needs to start somewhere. Growth. It was microscopic, but it was there. Sterling had already remarried, some pharmaceutical ace whose father owned half of Connecticut. Veronica had found out through Instagram, where Sterling's new wife was tagged in photos from their engagement party at the same country club where Veronica had once swanned around like she owned the place. Does it hurt? I'd asked Veronica when she showed me the pictures. Like a root canal without anesthesia, she'd admitted. But you know what she's wearing, my grandmother's ring, the one Sterling said was a family heirloom. Turns out it was just from Tiffany's current season. We'd laughed about that. Really laughed for the first time since the whole mess started. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was more like the beginning of the possibility of forgiveness, which was more than I'd expected. The funny thing about inheriting $25.5 million is that it doesn't actually solve your problems. It just gives you different ones. Like figuring out which charities are legitimate, or dealing with suddenly friendly distant relatives who remember your birthday for the first time in 30 years, or trying to date when you're wondering if someone likes you or your bank account. The money's a test. Dad had told me during one of our calls, just like pretending to be dead was a test. The question is, will you pass it? How do I know if I'm passing? You'll know you're failing if you start sounding like Veronica did at her wedding. Fair point. I'd started seeing a therapist, which felt like the most millionaire thing ever, except I was going to deal with the fact that my parents had faked their deaths, not because I was bored and rich. Dr. Chen had a field day with that first session. So your parents pretended to die to test you and your sister. Yes. And you inherited $25.5 million for keeping a secret. Yes. And your sister's marriage imploded in less than 3 weeks. 18 days, actually. She'd looked at me over her glasses. Have you considered writing a book? I hadn't, but Veronica had. She'd called me 2 weeks ago excited about something for the first time since the wedding that wasn't. I'm writing our story, she'd announced. But like, from my perspective, a cautionary tale about greed and family and the dangers of loving money more than people. You're writing a book about how you tried to steal my inheritance. I'm writing a book about how I learned what really matters, she'd corrected. My agent says redemption stories sell really well. Of course, Veronica had found an agent before she'd written a single word. Some things never change. It's been 6 months now since my parents revealed their elaborate death-daying test, and I'm sitting in the same pediatric ward where I've worked for the past 5 years, just finishing up my shift. You might wonder why I'm still here wiping runny noses and calming anxious parents, when I could be lying on a beach somewhere drinking something with an umbrella in it. The truth is, this is where I feel most like myself. Not Hazel, the secret millionaire, just Hazel the nurse who knows which vending machine has the best coffee and which janitor will sneak you extra pudding cups for the kids. Veronica came by yesterday. She's been doing that more lately, showing up with coffee and what she calls research questions for her book. But what I recognize as attempts to rebuild something between us. She looked different. Not poor different, but authentic different. Gone were the extensions and the fake nails and the designer everything. She wore jeans and a Boston College sweatshirt that had actual coffee stains on it. I got my first commission check, she told me, proud in a way I'd never heard before. Sold a condo to a teacher, gave her a discount that probably broke some corporate rule, but she reminded me of Mom. Our parents had visited last month, taking us both to dinner at the kind of restaurant Veronica used to love. The kind where they don't put prices on the women's menus, and the bathrooms have attendants. Except this time, Veronica had looked uncomfortable the whole time, fidgeting with her cloth napkin like it might bite her. This used to be my dream, she'd said, looking around at the crystal and gold everything. Now it just seems wasteful. Growth, Mom had said, simply raising her water glass in a toast to growth. Dad had cleared his throat then. That way he did when he was about to say something important. Girls, we need to tell you something else about the money. Veronica and I had exchanged glances. After everything, what else could there be? The 25.5 million isn't all of it, he'd said. Casual as anything. I'd nearly choked on my overpriced salmon. What? There's more. Quite a bit more, actually. But that's in a trust controlled by both of you together. It can only be accessed if you both agree on how to use it, and only for charitable purposes. Veronica had stared at them. How much more? Another 30 million, Mom had said, like she was telling us about a sale at Target. And you want us to what? Figure out how to give it away together? Veronica had asked. We want you to remember that you're sisters. Dad had said the money was never the real inheritance. The real inheritance was supposed to be each other. We almost broke that with our test. And we're trying to fix it. Veronica and I had looked at each other across that ridiculous table with its gold-leafed edges and its pretentious everything. And for the first time in months, we'd really seen each other. Not the woman who'd tried to steal from me, not the sister who'd kept secrets, but just us. Flawed, complicated, working on it. Us. We meet every Tuesday now, Veronica and I, at a coffee shop halfway between her real estate office and my hospital. We go through charity applications, research causes, argue about where the money would do the most good. She's surprisingly passionate about education funding. I lean toward medical causes. We're finding middle ground. You know what the funny thing is? Veronica said during our last meeting, stirring sugar into her very normal, very non-fancy coffee. I'm happier now than I was at my wedding. Isn't that pathetic? No, I'd told her. It's growth. Sterling's new wife had reached out to Veronica last week wanting to know if the prenup Sterling had insisted on was normal. Veronica had told her to get a lawyer, a good one. Then she'd called me laughing and crying at the same time. I gave her your lawyer's number, she'd said. The one you paid for. Karma really is a circle, isn't it? It is. It really is. The truth about inheriting $25.5 million is that it doesn't make you a different person. It just amplifies who you already are. Veronica, faced with the promise of money she hadn't earned, became the worst version of herself. I'd like to think I stayed true to who I was, but honestly, who knows what would have happened if the situation had been reversed. My parents knew, though, somehow they knew. That's why they structured the test the way they did. Why they watched and waited and let us reveal ourselves. It wasn't cruel, though it felt that way at first. It was necessary. Money is like fire. Dad had told me once years ago when I was complaining about not having enough for something I wanted. It can warm your home or burn it down. The difference isn't in the fire, it's in how you handle it. I'd thought it was just one of his teacher metaphors at the time. Turns out it was a warning and a promise, and a test I didn't know I was already taking. Last week, a patient's mother recognized me from a news article about our family that Veronica had reluctantly agreed to part of her book publicity. The woman had looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. 25 million, she'd said. And you're still here emptying bedpans. Someone has to, I'd said. But why you? I thought about it for a moment because if I left, I'd just be someone with money. Here, I'm someone who helps. The money doesn't change that. It just means I can help more. She nodded, understanding something that had taken me months to figure out myself. Veronica's book comes out next month. She let me read the manuscript, and it's good. Really good. Raw and honest in ways I didn't expect. The dedication made me cry. To Hazel, who kept the secret that saved us both, and to our parents who loved us enough to let us fail. But the last line of the book is what really got me. Veronica wrote, I spent my whole life thinking inheritance meant money. Turns out the real inheritance was learning who I really am when I thought no one was watching, and who I could become when I realized everyone was. The funny thing about secrets is that they're heavy when you're keeping them, but even heavier after they're revealed. You have to figure out what to do with all that truth. How to rebuild in the crater where the secret used to be. We're still figuring that out. Veronica and I, our parents, even Sterling's new wife who calls Veronica for advice. Now we're all trying to build something better in the space where the lies used to live. But here's the thing I've learned about $25.5 million. It's just paper and numbers until you do something with it. Veronica's wedding cost $500,000 and lasted one day. The pediatric ward's new family fund has helped 43 families so far, and that impact will last lifetimes. The secret to keeping secrets, it turns out, isn't about staying quiet. It's about knowing when silence is golden and when it's just yellow. I kept quiet about the money, and it saved me from losing everything. Veronica kept quiet about her greed until she thought it was safe to reveal it, and it cost her everything she thought she wanted. But in the end, we both got what we needed. I got the resources to make a difference. Veronica got a second chance to become someone worth knowing. Our parents got their daughters back. Different than before. Maybe a little broken, but trying to heal. And that $500,000 wedding, it turns out it was worth every penny. Not for what it celebrated, but for what it revealed. Veronica thought she was marrying into money. Instead, she married into truth. The divorce was just the receipt. So if you ever find yourself sitting on a massive secret wondering if you should keep your mouth shut, remember this. Secrets have expiration dates. The trick is knowing whether yours will age like wine or milk, and sometimes just Sometimes, keeping your mouth shut at your sister's wedding might just save your inheritance and your soul. That's my story. A story about death that wasn't wealth that was, and the price of keeping secrets in a family where everyone thought they knew the score. Turns out our parents were the only ones keeping real score. And the game was never about the money. It was about who we'd become when we thought the game was over. Thank God I kept quiet. Thank God Veronica didn't. And thank God our parents loved us enough to die for the truth, even if they came back to life to deliver. Maybe this story touched something inside you, a moment you lived, a feeling you once carried. We all think we know our family, but Hazel's journey reminds us that people often reveal their truest selves when they think no one is watching. The test wasn't really about the money, was it? It was about character. It was about whether loyalty could survive temptation, and whether love could endure greed. Hazel didn't just inherit a fortune, she inherited the heavy burden of truth. She learned that silence can be a shield protecting not just her future, but her integrity. And in doing so, she taught us that sometimes the hardest thing to do isn't to speak up, but to stay quiet when every instinct screams to shout. Veronica's transformation is perhaps the most surprising part of this tale. We love to hate the villain, but seeing her stripped of her pretenses, forced to confront the hollowness of her materialism, and then slowly, painfully rebuilding herself, that is a redemption arc worth reading. It reminds us that failure, even spectacular failure, isn't the end. It can be the beginning of something real. And let's talk about the parents. Talk about playing the long game. Their death was extreme, yes, but it was born out of a desperate love, a desire to save their daughters from themselves. They proved that sometimes you have to break a bone to reset it properly. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to keep a secret that felt like it was burning a hole in your pocket, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been tested by family in a way that changed everything? Or maybe you just want to applaud Hazel for not throwing that bouquet right at Veronica's head. And please tell me where you're watching from, whether it's a quiet town like Hazel's or a bustling city like Chicago. I read every comment, and knowing you're out there listening gives me the inspiration to find and tell more stories of resilience, justice, and the beautiful, messy complexity of being human. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Remember, money can buy a wedding, but it can't buy character. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.